Welcome to Daily Tax Minute. This is Tony Novak here to share a few points on saving taxes and staying out of tax trouble. This episode focuses on that last one, staying out of tax trouble. So here we are. It is New Year's Eve. It's a couple minutes before 5 p.m. This is the last thing that I have on my agenda for the day. For tax planners like me, year end, and particularly even December 31st, was a very busy day for me. But I needed to wrap this one thing up. Many small nonprofits operate on a calendar year basis, and they change their boards over at the first meeting in January. That's a common practice throughout the nonprofit industry. And I was asked to join a local board, which I do from time to time. I've been involved with as many as a dozen or as few as just one, but it goes up and down according to what's going on in the community. But in any event, I was asked and I agreed to join a local board. And when an attorney or a CPA joins the board of a nonprofit, we're supposed to do basic due diligence. I joke about it. We're supposed to make sure that the organization exists. And basically, that means four things, and that's what I'm going to cover in this episode. So one is if you are using a name, you want to make sure that and you're using an entity, ABC Nonprofit Corp. You want to make sure that the corporation is actually filed and exists. In many cases, I find that that's not the case, that a fictitious name has been adopted or an LLC is being used and it's not actually an entity. It's not actually formed. There needs to be an organizational document for a nonprofit, and that's true even if it's not an LLC or corporation. Even just an association still needs to have an organizational document. That document must contain a disposition of assets clause. In other words, what happens to the assets, the bank account, or the kitty when the organization dissolved. That's an actual legal requirement to have a nonprofit organization approved by IRS. And yet still, I see some slip through. IRS doesn't catch it and they slip through without that. The second point is that a nonprofit organization must have a conflict of interest policy. Does not need to be elaborate. And people like me just give out, here's a sample of what others use. I don't prepare the legal document, but I'll show you what other small nonprofits use. And basically it's to say something like this. It would be ridiculous to prohibit conflicts of interest. That's not the point. The point is just really say, if a member has a conflict of interest, that is, you're lobbying for your son to get hired as the caretaker of the nonprofit's property, well, then you tell the board, you disclose the conflict of interest just so they're aware of it and deal with it appropriately. It's not an intention to get rid of conflict of interest, which almost always exists in small nonprofits. So, but that is a requirement. You actually have to have that document. The board can put it in front of itself. It doesn't need to go to members, just have the board approve it. Third thing is a annual filing with the IRS. It's a Form 990. There's different forms. There's simple forms. There's complicated forms. It depends on your organization and your size. And then the fourth is an annual filing with the state, particularly if it's a corporation or an LLC. There's always an annual filing requirement. Some small associations, perhaps maybe small enough that they can escape that state filing, but in most cases, most nonprofits need some type of state filing. So those are the four things we look for minimum bare bones for a nonprofit. And by the way, we're not shooting for minimum bare bones. We're actually shooting for running the organization efficiently. So there's a whole slew of practices and additional steps that can be taken. But as far as just getting on the board, I just have to look at those four things, and then we'll look at other things for betterment later on. All right, that's all I have. Signing off for the last Daily Tax Minute for the year, and I'll see you in 2025.